Anyway, okay, so we're talking about the geopolitics of drugs. The AIDS epidemic started in 1982, 1983. The sad thing about that is that I was working in medicine in 1982 and 1983. So I was right at the beginning of this thing. I mean, I was in the forefront of AIDS research and whatnot, and it was scary. AIDS killed you, and it killed you every damn time. There was no question as to whether you would survive or not. Nobody did, not in the beginning, because we didn't even know what it was. We had no clue. Not only that, but we couldn't even figure out how to figure out if somebody had it or not. So we had to assume that all blood was contaminated. Now before that, we used to play blood all the time. That doesn't sound very good. But you know, when you're trying to help people, you don't worry about whether you've got gloves on. For one thing, there aren't any gloves to be put on. But after 1982, 1983, we had to start wearing gloves. So all of a sudden, all these procedures that we were doing with our hands, and our hands were so sensitive, we could find a vein. All of a sudden, we had to put this gloves on, yeah. So all of a sudden, there's a barrier between you and your patient, and people had a difficult time. People dropped out of medicine because they couldn't do it. They couldn't handle it. Their hands weren't sensitive enough to feel through the latex, and the latex was thick. I mean, it was really thick in the beginning. Then they started experimenting with new types of latex. The latex became thinner and thinner and thinner. Still gave you protection, but of course it was more sensitive to the touch. So eventually, of course, we got through all of this. The other problem was, how the hell do you kill off the AIDS virus? And we didn't know. We thought Clorox, maybe that'll work. We were using Physahex at the time. Physahex didn't work at all. So everybody was scared. So that a lot of people dropped out of medicine because they were afraid they would contract AIDS. And some people did, unfortunately. But one of the things that happened was we discovered a substance that killed the virus, and we knew it killed the virus. And as it turns out, the substance was relatively common. It was easy to make. It was relatively common. It was a substance called nonoxynol 9. And the reason that if we had it is because it was an anti-spermagent. In other words, it killed sperm. So it was readily available. It was relatively simple chemical structure. So we started using nonoxynol 9. If we washed everything down with nonoxynol 9, you knew that there wasn't any AIDS. So you were okay. Really a tough time. Tons of people just dropped out of medicine because they were scared to death. We didn't even know how to measure it. We didn't even know how to detect it. We had no way of finding any of this stuff out. People were just dying, and it was really, really scary. I was working in a hospital in Omaha at the time when this thing hit. And the hospitals in New York and New Jersey were just full. So what they were doing, they were farming out their patients to other areas of the country. Well, Chicago wouldn't take them because they had an epidemic going on at the same time. Kansas City couldn't take them because Kansas City had an epidemic going on. So guess what happened next? We got a bunch of AIDS patients from New Jersey in Omaha because we had lots and lots of hospital beds and we had hardly any AIDS. The only AIDS we had was in Lincoln, not in Omaha. Very, very strange situation. Anyway, okay. So in the beginning, the only people we saw coming down with AIDS were homosexual males. They were the only ones coming down with it. And of course the evangelicals are screaming, oh, God's punishing you for being gay, that kind of thing. It's really kind of interesting. And they were actually cheering as these people were dying, as confusing as that may be. But it's really kind of a sad, sad time in the United States. But then, of course, around the world, the gay population isn't the only population that is dying of AIDS. in Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, there were a lot of individuals that were female that were dying from AIDS. It was a newborns were being, women were being contaminated with AIDS during their pregnancy, or they were already positive, and the newborns were being contracting AIDS in the womb, and they were dying soon after birth. It's really a tragedy. Millions of people were dying all around the world. It looked like a really ugly time. And of course, we needed to figure out how in the world we could detect it. We needed to figure out what it was. So we're doing all this research. Actually, we weren't doing any research. That was the sad part, because Ronald Reagan was the president of the United States at the time. He didn't put any money into AIDS research. And the reason he didn't was because he was conservative, and his base was conservative. And the conservatives were cheering the fact that all those gay people were dying, because God was punishing all the gay people. So he didn't do anything, and he didn't do anything for a long time. It wasn't until the middle 80s that he decided that he was going to start funding AIDS research. And the reason is because one of his best friends died of AIDS. Rock Hudson was a very good friend of Ronald Reagan's. They had started together as actors, and so once he died, the people in Hollywood went, Ron, he was one of your best friends. How can you possibly deny that AIDS exists? So at that time we started research, but of course they were already doing research all around the world. Our science is maybe a little bit better than other people's. The French are the first ones that discovered what the AIDS virus was, and they called it HTLV3. We found the AIDS virus in the United States a couple months later, and we identified it, and everybody's trying to come up with a test to find out if somebody's got it, to find out how to measure it, and of course all that took place right at the beginning, right in the middle 80s. But I mean, the whole epidemic started in the early 80s, and it wasn't until the middle 80s that we could even measure it. In 1985, I ruptured my spleen in a soccer game. They took me to surgery way longer than they should have. It took 28 hours for them to diagnose my ruptured spleen, which is stupid. But finally they diagnosed my ruptured spleen. I went into surgery, and when they opened me up, the bleeding had been arrested. But when they pulled the clot out of my gut, it ruptured again. So I started bleeding, and I almost bled to death. So they had to give me 6 units of blood. Now the sad thing is that in 1985 they couldn't test for AIDS, but I got 6 units of blood. And my surgery was done in Omaha, which is okay, because they didn't have any AIDS in Omaha, but they did have AIDS in Lincoln. Of course, I got 6 units of blood. So there was always a possibility that I had been contaminated with AIDS, unbeknownst to anybody, because they couldn't test the units. So for the next 15 years, I had to have my blood drawn from time to time to see if I had the AIDS virus. And of course, it never turned positive. So everything's fine. I'm not going to die of AIDS. That was what, 30 years ago, 33 years ago, I ruptured my spleen on my mother's birthday. Spleen. It was on my mother's birthday. And that's a question I'm thinking about. When did I rupture my spleen? It's on my mother's birthday. October 19th. Hepatitis C is a liver infection that infects about 4 million people in the United States. Los Angeles is really kind of an interesting place if you've ever been out there. Los Angeles is right in the middle, and then you've got Anaheim, and you've got Pasadena. You've got all these other communities around. Long Beach is out there. But Los Angeles proper is just the middle of that whole mess of people. And there's only 4 million people in Los Angeles. There's 17 million people within 50 miles of the center of Los Angeles. There's 17 million people. That's a lot of people. Anyway, 4 million people, that's how many people, the population of Los Angeles is the number of people that have hepatitis C. 85 to 90% of all intravenous drug users are infected with the hepatitis C virus, mostly from sharing needles. Unfortunately, I had a student who was a intravenous crystal meth user. And she never let anybody use her needles, and she never let anybody use her needles. She had somebody staying at her place who found her needles. And she shot up with her needles. And she didn't know it. She didn't tell her. The next thing she knows, she's got hepatitis C. And she was so pissed. You know how nice people are. Somebody comes, they don't have a place to live, so you let them stay in your place. You let them eat your ramen noodles. And then they start using your stash and you kick them out. That's what happens next. Anyway, that's what happened to her. Now she's going to die with hepatitis C. Potentially, except now we have a treatment. And it's relatively new. It's only been out on the market for about 3 years. Club drugs, ever since the Roaring 20s, people have been mixing the coolest of music with psychoactive drugs. This has been going on forever. It's not just now, but it has been going on forever. And the Roaring 20s, during the Roaring 20s, jazz was the music that people were mixing with drugs, and the drugs that they were using was cocaine and bootleg liquor, mostly gin, because it's so easy to make. The women were called flappers, as fascinating as that is, and the men were referred to as jazzbos. So if you were back in the 1920s and you were cool, which wasn't a term that they used, but if you were cool, then you would call all the female people that did the stuff flappers. They were flappers, and the men were jazzbos. And they, of course, had a uniform that they wore. The women wore dresses that were cut on the bias, and that doesn't make any sense to me. My mother was telling me she was not a flapper. But the thing about the flappers, the interesting thing is, they used to wear hose. They used to wear a hose, and of course the hose were connected to something, whatever, but they would roll them down to their knees to show that they were skinny enough that they didn't have to wear a girdle or this is one of the cool things that they did. They also they didn't wear brassieres. They wanted to be as flat-chested as possible. As bizarre as that is. And the reason my mother wasn't a flapper was because she was full-figured. She had boobs. So she couldn't be a flapper because her chest was too large, as strange as that is. They bobbed their hair. This is a bobbed hairdo. So somebody with a relatively flat chest that has a really tight dress on and their hose rolled down to below their knees or just at their knees, that's cool. That's the coolest thing you could possibly do. Bobbed hair, tight dress, no chest, and rolled down stockings. There you go. So you couldn't be a flapper unless you were relatively flat chested or could flatten your chest somehow. The men, of course, greased down their hair a lot. They put a lot of stuff in their hair and they greased it down and they combed it back. Sometimes they combed it up in a pompadour, which is always attractive. They sometimes wore tuxedos. Of course, the men's outfits are not nearly as interesting as the women's outfits. Anyway, they were jazzbos because they greased their hair back. And they had their own language, which is kind of cool. Anyway, fun stuff. And of course, they were drinking bootleg liquor because Prohibition started in 1919, and the Roaring 20s were in the 20s.
That's what I was going to ask. Because the bootleg liquor.
They had to be bootleg because that's the only way to do it. Okay.
There's actually a movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Called The Swing Kids.
I haven't seen it.
It's about, of course, Hitler, and then of course the people who are into swing dancing, and
right.
how some of the people who were into swing dancing had no choice but to join Hitler's army, whether they
right.
So it's like they were part of the army during the day, and then at night they'll hit up these clubs instead of going with
They dress differently, take off their uniforms, and put on real cool clothes. Yeah,
it's interesting. I love that movie.
Anything that any movie about the 1920s, you're going to see flappers and jazzbos, really, but they probably don't call the men jazzbos, mainly because it's the men they were doing all the writing. Of course, they're talking about flappers. In the 1950s, the music was the blues. The psychoactive drugs were heroin and whiskey. The men and the women were either called beats or beatniks. If you've ever seen Dobie Gillis, an old television show from the early 1960s, Maynard G. Krebs is a beatnik. He's a beatnik. He had a beard, just a little bit of a beard. He wore a sweatshirt all the time, and he talked in vernacular. He talked the lingo of the beatnik, which was different than everybody else was talking, of course. Anyway, they were the beatniks. As fun as that is. In the 1960s and 70s, when I was growing up, the music became rock, and then it became hard rock. The psychoactive drugs that fueled the music were LSD, speed, marijuana, and wine. And the people were hippies, and the women, of course, were chicks. Women were chicks. So if I call women chicks, I'm just teasing because I'm married to a woman who would kick the shit out of me if I ever called her a chick. Anyway, as we drifted into the new millennium, of course, the music became techno or electronic trance music. The psychoactive drugs that fueled the craze were MDMA, marijuana, nitrous oxide, ketamine, GHB, and beer. Two of these are date rape drugs. Ketamine and GHB are both date rape drugs. And women sometimes make the mistake of doing things that they think are cool, and then they end up unconscious and sexually molested. So it has been a really interesting time looking at what's going on. So there was a lot of that taking place, a lot of date rape taking place. And of course it's cool. It's cool. So, I mean, if you get raped, that's part of the cool, I guess. At least that's what the guy thought. The participants are referred to as ravers. This was a lot more popular on the East Coast, really popular in Europe. This kind of stuff is taking place in Europe, but not nearly as popular out here or in the Midwest. Chicago never took off in Chicago, but New York. Actually, there was a movie made about ravers in New York, and it starred the kid that was in Home Alone, Calkins. What's his name? Macaulay Culkin.
Yeah.
Macaulay Culkin. Oh, it's scary. It's really kind of strange. But that was part of the club scene back in New York. Los Angeles never took hold. San Francisco a little bit, but the East Coast especially, Boston and New York, especially New York, big raver cities. But over in Europe, Amsterdam, my God, they used to have a big party in Berlin every year. It was a huge rave. It was this massive rave that happened every year. I think they've stopped it now, but all kinds of really, a lot of techno music. You couldn't go into the city because the city was full of people. This is actually a picture of that rave in Berlin. And people would come from all over the world to go to this rave. I can't remember what they called it. I never went, of course. I was there in the 80s. She's dead. She poisoned herself to death with alcohol. She drank too much vodka, her drink of choice. She also smoked a lot of pot, but that's it. I can't think of the name. Marijuana continues. I'm sorry? Amy Winehouse, that's the one. She's a Brit. And she had all those cool tattoos, so I mean, who can argue with that? Marijuana continues to create controversy. She's smoking pot, by the way. It's a reefer. It's not a blunt. It's not big enough for a blunt. Legalized in many states for medicinal purposes, and of course legalized for recreational use now. People are required to have prescriptions for its use. We don't know, and like I said last time, we don't know what's going to happen because the Justice Department is doing some really interesting things. So we'll see what happens. There's a lot of strange political things going on right now. They're investigating the collusion, the Russian collusion, and one of the individuals that they're questioning is the Secretary of the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is actually under investigation. So he can't really do anything because he has to defend himself. So right now, there's not a whole lot going on. Maybe if the Russian collusion thing goes away and he doesn't get thrown in prison, then potentially what will happen is he will start cracking down on the growth of marijuana in the United States. Marijuana continues to be the most widely used illegal drug throughout much of the world, including the United States, Canada, Australia, Mexico, and South America, South Africa. Canada, a lot of research is coming out of Canada and New Zealand and Australia because they've had semi-legalized marijuana for 50 years. So there's a lot of research coming out of New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. So if you see anything from Australia and Canada and New Zealand dealing with marijuana, there's probably some pretty good research. In the United States, we haven't done a lot of research because it has only been legalized for about 5 years. And what we need to do is look at research over time. We need to find out if it's really affecting people's intelligence. We know that it affects your short-term memory, but we need to find out if it's really lowering people's intelligence if they smoke too early. And
Or if they're functioning like invading.
right. I have a friend that was kind of a deadhead anyway, and he went over to Vietnam and claimed that, the PTSD made me do it, man. But he's been smoking pot for about 45 years. So nobody's exactly sure. The last time I went home, I asked about him, and nobody knew anything about it. But really a fascinating guy. He used to steal his mother's Social Security check. Did I say steal? He got to it first, so I guess it stinks. He used to take her Social Security check to buy his pot, and she'd be left with nothing. Of course, he didn't care as long as he.
Well, they're kind of doing some research now that how marijuana affects your, when you function when you're driving.
Right.
And now they're saying it's not really good if they smoke too much and decide to drive.
Right. They usually drive really slow. Yeah. They
Or
really.
they get confused.
Right. Yeah. I was driving down the street one day, and this guy turned left. It was at a stoplight, and he had to go right, and he turned left, and as soon as he saw the stoplight from the other direction, he stopped right in the middle of the intersection with this whole line of cars behind him. And everybody's going, oh my God, it must be an old man. And he just got confused. No, it was a kid. It was a kid, and he was stoned out of his gourd. Anyway, and he saw that red light, and, and it was just a reflex action. He stopped, but it was a mess. I wasn't directly behind him, but the guy that was directly behind him ran into the back of his car. And that was a little weird because this is a major intersection, and here we have this accident right in the middle of the intersection. So we had to wait for the cops. And the reason we had to wait for the cops was because the kid wouldn't get out of his car. So he's stuck in the middle of the intersection, stuck right there in the middle of the intersection, and he won't get out of his car. I mean, otherwise, we could have moved everything off to the side and traffic could have started again. It wasn't that much damage, but he was just scared. He was paranoid. I know.
Poor kid.
It was so weird. I wanted to pop
It's
the
weird
kid.
in Colorado, if you get pulled over and if you have a certain amount of marijuana in your possession, sometimes it just depends on how much you have
Right.
at the moment. If it's over the limits, then you could get arrested. But if you get pulled over and they smell it, then you can also get arrested. But it doesn't make sense. Like, even if you pull them over and they have an amount with them and still, let them go scot-free, but when you pull them over and you smell the weed,
Then they've been using the weed. There's always secondhand smoke. There's always thirdhand smoke, which means that the residue is is in the area. I know, it gets really weird. The problem is with alcohol, of course, you can breathalyze it. We can tell just how drunk you are.
and they'll charge you with DUI.
Yeah. Driving under the influence, even though we're not exactly sure we can't really.
If they smell it,
Right. If you could smell it, then probably it's in the area. But of course, you know, with alcohol, we can measure it. But with marijuana, we don't even know how much causes you to be,
how much high you are
how high and how goofy you are. Yeah, we don't know. We're not exactly sure. And this is a problem, because these people shouldn't be on the road. They are an impairment to safety. But how much is too much? How little is too little? If you smoke today, then tomorrow you're still going to have THC in your system. Yeah. Are you still impaired? That's the question. Yeah, I know it's a real strange question, and we haven't come up with an answer yet. So in Colorado, if you can smell it, they arrest you for DUI. For DUI. That's the rule. Okay. But it could be residual. Maybe you haven't smoked in 3 months, but your car stinks because people smoke marijuana in your car. They smell it on your breath. The destructive effects of tobacco have prompted many countries to try to curb its use. Cuba banned smoking in public places. Ireland has banned smoking in pubs. In many states in the United States, smoking is banned in any public area, and this includes Iowa, Illinois, Arizona, and Montana. The 3 states, the 3 last states that I've lived in. Actually, yeah, Illinois. Illinois is right next to Iowa. I lived right next to Illinois. I know, this is Ronald Reagan pushing cigarettes. What a monster he was back when Chesterfield was actually Chesterfield. As late as 1966, almost half the population smoked regularly. And I told you about this when I was a kid. There's ashtrays in everybody's house. 42.6%. Now, 42.6% is the whole population. We're talking about kids too. So 42.6% is almost everybody. That doesn't include all the kids in the elementary school, probably, we hope. But it's 42.6%. Lots and lots of adults were smoking cigarettes. And lots of adults were dying in their 50s. It was very common. For some reason, I've been obsessed. I was afraid my parents were going to die and leave me. So I used to read the obituaries all the time. I didn't really read them. What I was looking for, my dad's 36 and my mom's 40. Are they going to die soon? So I would look at the obituaries to see how old people were. And I've been doing this all my life. I know I'm obsessed with death. Yeah, what I want to prove is, here I am, I'm 68 years old, should I be dead? You know, that's the question I ask. How long can I live? How long do you think I'm going to live, Johnny? What do you think? 90? Thank you. I'll take 90. See, that's 22 more years. I'm okay. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with 90.
Well, you seem healthy enough.
I feel like I'm 35 years old. I know, I feel good. But I was worried that my parents were going to die, so I've been looking at this stuff. And of course, this is, I used to live in Muncie, Indiana, which is a blue-collar town. A lot of factory workers, a lot of smokers, a lot of farmers that smoke. And these guys were dying in their 50s. They were dying of emphysema, they were dying of lung cancer. My mom was a nurse, so she would come home and tell us stories of people with lung cancer and emphysema. And if you've got emphysema, of course, you can't breathe very well. So they have to get that mucus out, so they beat on their back. So they puke up this brown guck, black guck out of their mucus. It comes out of their expiratory nicotine is what's coming out. Anyway, so 42.6%. 2005, of course, we've reduced the percentage of individuals that smoke. It's been reduced to below 1/4 of the U.S. population, 22.5%. That's a lot of really pissed off smokers, because the only place they can smoke is pretty much outside at their own damn house, because you can't smoke. I guess you can smoke here, can't you? Outside, you can't smoke in the building, of course. But I think you can. Over at the sub, there's one of those candlestick things that you. Yeah, I think there is. Okay, so you can smoke outside. So pretty, if you're smoking, you're not supposed to smoke with your kids in the car. If your kids are in the car, you're not supposed to smoke, because secondhand smoke, thirdhand smoke. This decline had much to do with the discovery that cigarettes contain many carcinogens that cause disturbing medical problems. Of course, we've known for a really long time that this was true, but the cigarette companies would sue anybody that said it, and they would sue you big time. And these guys had all the money in the world. They were one of the wealthiest organizations in the United States. R.J. Reynolds, Lorillard, these are all major tobacco companies. In the 1960s, we discovered, in the 1970s, we wouldn't let them advertise on television anymore. In the 1960s, every other commercial was a tobacco commercial, telling you about how mild this tobacco was and how it made you happy, and how it does make you happy, actually. Smoking does make you happy. But if you watch television over the holidays, they had an advertisement about that nicotine is one of the most addictive substances known to man, and not to smoke cigarettes. That was on television, and it was put on television by the tobacco companies. It's part of the settlement they made with the United States, because they've been lying. They had to pay $276 billion. They had to put it in a fund, and part of it has to do with advertisement, keeping people from smoking. Gambling is the same way. Gamblers Anonymous. They had to put money, all these casinos have to pay into a fund that advertises against gambling addiction. So they're actually arguing against coming to the casino and gambling. 1,178 people die every day from the effects of smoking in the United States. 1,178. That's everybody, all the students at this institution are dead. Every day. So you don't just die today, you die tomorrow too, and then you die the next day, and then you die the next day. Because we have about 1,178 students. A study, and that's all over, that's not just here. That's also at Window Rock and Shiprock, that's a lot of funerals. A study in England showed that smoking can reduce life expectancy by about 10 years. And I don't smoke. I want to live forever. That's my, Of course, Johnny's only going to let me live until I'm 90. And so if I'm still jumping around, Johnny's going to take me out. That's what I heard you say. Okay, thanks. I appreciate it. Despite the reduction of revenue of tobacco companies in the United States, they have been able to keep profits up by developing foreign markets in the third world. This is really kind of interesting. I have a friend from North Carolina, and he complains every day, because he owns stock in the tobacco companies. Complains every day that we're just attacking tobacco, or tobacco's not that bad. It's not their fault. It's people's fault. They smoke too much. If they just smoked a little bit, they'd be okay. But he could sell more cigarettes. Bullshit. He's a scientist. He's a biochemist. And he says this kind of stupid stuff. In the United States, tobacco manufacturers have tried to sustain their market by targeting females, minorities, and younger smokers. You may remember that once upon a time there was an advertising campaign where they had a camel, cartoon of a camel smoking cigarettes, and he was so cool. Well, why would adults why would they respond to something like that? Well, the answer is they don't. It was for kids. And kids were trying to be cool they wanted to be just like the camel. As stupid as that is. Females, they started producing they started producing cigarettes for females that were smaller, and they had printing on the paper. Pretty
to make
things.
it look more feminine.
So you could look more feminine while you smoke. And they
Are those skinny looking ones?
Yeah, those skinny ones.
I've seen
Exactly.
older instructors out at UNM with this tiny little.
Yeah. Isn't that cute? You didn't see any men smoking though.
No.
Of course not. Minorities, and they advertise more in minority areas, in areas where minorities live.
They sell it more in minorities or
They
probably
do.
stripping areas.
Oh yeah, well if you go to the corner drugstore or the corner store, the mom and pop stores, the whole back of the store is, right behind the counter, is just full of cigarettes. if you go to a place that's, there aren't very many minorities, there's only, there's only one little container of these cigarettes, because they don't smoke, white people don't smoke as much as minorities do. 1998, tobacco companies agreed to pay $246 billion over over the next 25 years for their illicit practices in the past. It took them 20 years to prosecute these bastards, but they finally did. I said 276. I apologize. Actually, it has increased. I'm not exactly sure how much it's increased. $246 billion. Worldwide, 33 million people use amphetamines or similar stimulant substances. In the United States, 16,000 meth labs were raided in 2004. I'm going to show you the latest figures on meth labs in the United States. However, meth labs have been partially controlled by controlling the precursor chemicals, ephedrine and pseudoephedrine, found in common cold remedies. So what they used to do, they used to go into a drugstore and they take all the cold medicine. They either steal it or they buy it, and they take as much as they could, and then they would make it into crystal meth. 16,000 labs. But here's what it is today. This is 2014, 4 years ago. 9,338 labs were busted. These are the ones that were busted. As you can see, the number one state in the union, as far as crystal meth is concerned, is Indiana, my home state. And I'm going to Indiana next week. Oh, I need to tell you guys. Next Thursday, I won't be here. I'll do a video of the lecture. You guys will have to watch the video. Okay. Indiana's number one. We're number one. We're number one. Number two is Missouri. And as you can see, they only busted 4 meth labs in Arizona. This is in 2014. Now, Pinyon used to have a really serious problem with crystal meth. It kind of controlled the town. But the feds have gone in and busted the area. I'm just wondering if that number has increased from 4 to something higher than 4. I don't know. But as you can see, Indiana is a really serious problem. 1 in Maryland, 2 in Mississippi. The answer may be, well, they focused on Indiana. There's a reason why there's so much crystal meth being made in Indiana. One, it's a relatively rural state. The other is they've got a ready market in Chicago, Detroit, Cincinnati, and Louisville. So they've got millions of people around to sell their crystal meth to up in Chicago, Detroit, Cincinnati, and in Louisville. So there you go. That may be one of the reasons. It's centralized. So Indiana is the distribution point. So you can make crystal meth in Indiana and sell it in Chicago or Cincinnati or Louisville or Detroit. Treatment for amphetamine usage has skyrocketed in the past decade. In 1993, only 21,000 people sought treatment for amphetamine addiction. This figure had increased to 151,000 by 2004. I looked for recent statistics. I couldn't find them. Like I found the recent statistics as far as amphetamine, busted amphetamine places, manufacturers. Other stimulants also make an impact on our lives. The use of caffeine in recent years has increased markedly. Coffee kiosks have sprung up in tiny towns, and sales of caffeinated soda, soft and energy drinks have exploded. Monster, Full Throttle, Red Bull, Rockstar. I don't know that other one. Nobody has. You've got coffee. Probably got more caffeine in it anyway. Good job. Okay, there you go. Is it buzzing you out? Keeping you awake. That's all it's doing. Coffee? Keeping you up? Are you good? Are your eyes big like saucers? Nobody has a Monster.
This
See,
is my motivation.
I miss Brian. He always brought a Monster to class. I miss Brian. Oh well. 18% of teens, 4,300,000 have used Vicodin in the form of hydrocodone in 2004. Hydrocodone is the most widely used and abused prescription opiate. Vicodin. 10% to 2,300,000 teens abuse the opiate Percodan in the form of OxyContin, the time-release version of oxycodone. So Vicodin and Percodan are the two most abused opiates that we have on the market right now. I looked for better statistics, but there aren't any out there for a couple different reasons. One is this administration doesn't want to talk about that kind of stuff. They want to say that opiates are a problem, but they don't want to do anything about it because it costs money. So that's a problem. And the other reason is because the Congress has been truncating the research into this area for a long time. One of the things that has happened over the last 10 or 15 years, they've changed the way that police departments report things. And the reason they've done that is because of guns. Once upon a time, we used to talk about how many guns were involved in this kind of a problem and that kind of a problem, but Congress made it against the law to report that kind of information. So we're having a difficult time getting really good information out of the police departments. Once upon a time, of course, we had all kinds of good information telling us how prevalent something was, but of course now, not so much. Alcohol directly kills 75,000 people in the United States every year. 75,000, is that all? That's hardly anybody. Alcohol directly kills 1.8 million people worldwide every year. 17.6 million Americans have an alcohol abuse problem. That is about 8.5% of the adult population. Alcoholics make up 10 to 15% of people in hospitals. They make up 10 to 20% of people in nursing homes. So this is a really serious problem. If we could control alcohol consumption, potentially we could reduce the cost of medicine by a lot, as you can see, since 10 to 15% of the people in the hospitals are there because of alcohol. So if we could reduce that to half, 5 to 7.5%, then we would actually reduce the cost of medicine. When MRIs were done on gamblers, the portions of the brain that were activated by winning and losing were the same areas that were activated by cocaine. That's no surprise. Statistics show that 2.5 million Americans are classified as pathological gamblers. 3 million Americans are classified as problem gamblers. 50 million Americans are at risk for problem gambling. Really kind of fascinating, because whereas the tobacco companies fought the United States government, they tried to prove that nicotine was not destructive, that it wasn't causing people to die, that it wasn't causing cardiovascular disease. The casinos, of course, the casinos have only been around since the 1980s. Before the 1980s, gambling in the United States was against the law every place except for Las Vegas and Atlantic City. But in the 1980s, they opened a bingo parlor on the Seminole Reservation in Florida. And since then, the states have been, Ronald Reagan actually gave the states the right to negotiate with Indian tribes to create casinos. So wherever you have American Indians, potentially you started seeing casinos. And then people like Donald Trump sued the federal government, saying that it was discriminatory to only allow American Indians to build casinos. And at that point, they started building casinos. Actually, Atlantic City was a minor place, and then Donald Trump started building casinos. So Donald Trump has a lot to do with gambling in the United States. He owns a casino in Las Vegas. He used to own 3 in Atlantic City, but I think he shut all those down. So it's really kind of fascinating. Now we see casinos all over the place. Indiana has no American Indians, yet it has casinos in the state. So it's easiest for American Indians to open casinos because you have rights that other citizens don't have. So it's really kind of fascinating. Anyway, you guys got on top of this stuff. Well, maybe not you guys did it, but the casino owners got on top of this, and they realized that the federal government was going to come in and complain about problem gambling. So what they did, they got on top of this whole situation, and they started Gamblers Anonymous, and they started advertising at their casinos that if you have a problem, they don't want you to gamble if you have a problem gambling. Now, this is really kind of interesting.
Who's gonna be honest if they have a problem or not?
Exactly. Well, if you have a problem, you're not going to admit it. I mean, how many alcoholics come out and go, you know, I'm an alcoholic. I drink way too much. Doggone it. You know, that happens like every day. You have to pin them down and slap them in the face a couple times before you can get them to admit it. Now, this is really kind of interesting. They did a study up in Minnesota in 2004. And what they discovered was that 1%, Minnesota has the Sioux that live in Minneapolis have opened a casino. It's a really relatively small tribe. But they opened this casino in Minneapolis. And the proceeds from that casino have made every member of the tribe a millionaire. That's interesting. Yeah, I know, that's really kind of interesting. Anyway, so they did a study up in Minnesota. And what they discovered was that 1% of the gamblers represented 50% of the wagers. So we have people that gamble a lot. And we have people that gamble and win a lot. And these are the people that wager most of the money. So it's only 1% of the population. So if you guys go in, you don't hardly ever go to the casino, but when you go in, you may drop 50, maybe $100 for fun. You're just trying to have a good time. But the people that really contribute to the proceeds in the casino are these high stakes gamblers. The guy that shot up Las Vegas was a high stakes gambler. Sometimes he would drop $1 million a night. I know. He would drop $1 million a night. I know, that's amazing, isn't it? How can you lose and win? Sometimes he won. Sometimes he won. And they know how to do it, actually. There's a way to do it. You gamble, let's see. You tell yourself you're going to gamble a certain amount of money. So you gamble that money, and every time you win, you put it off in a separate pile. So you gamble your $30,000 or whatever it is that you're going to gamble that night, and you set off all your winnings on the other side, and you just gamble the $50,000, and you take all this other money as profits. Okay. So then if it's more than $50,000, you've lost $50,000, but you've won $100,000. So now you've got $50,000 to gamble tomorrow night, and you've got $50,000 profit. So you take that $50,000 and put it in the bank. If he was doing this with $1 million, well, he said he was gambling $1 million a night. So yeah, that's the way to do it, and that's the way you don't lose. They want your $50,000. And the $100,000 doesn't come out of their profits, it comes out of the other money that other people have gambled. In the same year among the riverboats of Illinois, 10% of the gamblers accounted for 80% of the revenues. So it's these high-stake gamblers that are really supporting the casinos. It's not mom and pop. Mom and pop lose so that they can pay off these high-stake gamblers. The guy that shot up Las Vegas, it's not Pollard, it's Lawler. I think his name is Lawler. They would put him up in a hotel room. In a hotel room. How much does that cost them? Well, the overhead's probably $20 or $30, and the rest of it's profit. So if they put him up, they're only spending $20. They would give him, he would open everything in the room. He would open all the peanuts. He'd open all the whiskey bottles. He might take a sip out of them, but he didn't really drink everything. He didn't eat everything. He just they were giving it to him, so he wanted to use it. So he's, using all the towels and stealing all the soap, that kind of stuff. Really interesting. But they were putting him up, and they could do that because he represented 80% of all the revenues. I mean, if all of us go to the casino, I've got $180 right now. So I'm gonna lose 180, you know, you're gonna lose whatever you lose, and everybody loses whatever they lose, but it doesn't represent anywhere close to these guys. Okay. All right. So you're paying for those guys to gamble, actually, as interesting as that is. But when they gamble $1 million. When you gamble $100. So if they win, you pay for their winnings. It's really kind of bizarre.
Only one time I got a good payout from $20. It was my last $20 and I hit 700.
So how much money did you get?
About, well, would be probably my payout would be $680.
$680?
Yeah.
So you made $660.
Off of $20.
Not bad.
And my husband kept telling me keep going, but I was like, no, that's, I know this is my,
That's
this
the
where
way
it
to do it,
stops.
right. So how much other money did you spend other than that $20?
That was it.
That's it?
That was it.
Did you spend any more money?
He spent, yeah, but it was his own money, I didn't care. But for me, I just told myself, just $20, don't spend any more. And
See, that's the way
I
smart,
had to walk out because,
that's the way smart gamblers do it. They don't want you to walk out. They want you to put that money back into the system. You wouldn't have won the rest of the night. Did your husband win?
no,
No.
I was the only one that walked
And
out.
how much money did he lose?
Probably about 200.
So 200 of the $660 was his money. Yeah, okay. So in reality, you only won $460. But that's okay. It's $460. While gambling may be the most economically devastating behavioral addiction, there are others that are equally personally devastating. Compulsive eating, of course, will make you obese. Anorexia will make you dead. Bulimia will give you gastric problems. Internet addiction can keep you on the internet all the time. Sexual addictions, people do have sexual addictions where they go out and try to hook up with as many people as they possibly can. Excessive television addiction, I have this problem. Last night there was nothing on television. And guess what I did? Guess what I was doing at 11:30? I was trying to find something to watch. And I turned on the television at 6 o'clock and I didn't turn it off until 11:30. That's 5.5 hours of watching nothing on television. I mean, there was crap on television last night. I have no idea what
Were
I
you
was
just going through the channels?
watching. No, I only watch the movie channels. I don't like commercials. And I'll only watch certain shows on television. Big Bang. It's on tonight.
Sheldon.
I watch television on Monday nights. Kevin can wait. Mainly because he's added that new lady, the one that he was Leah Remini, whatever it is. Okay. I'm really interested to see how they're going to hook up eventually, because they were married on the other show.
Yeah.
They killed off the lady that was on the show before. Really fascinating. Okay, not important. Excessive television addiction, compulsive shopping, of course, and pornography addiction. Pornography is the #1 profit-making thing in the world. Pornography, as odd as that seems, as strange as that seems. And that's the end of the chapter. So let's go ahead and kick into chapter 2, which means I'm on target. Second week, and I'm starting with the second chapter. This book only has 10 chapters. So I'm either ahead or I'm where I should be. Let's talk about heredity, environment, and psychoactive substances. Hot dog. Okay. I know, everybody's impressed. Psychoactive drugs are substances that directly affect the central nervous system. So if you take a drug that doesn't affect the central nervous system, it's not psychoactive. Psycho means brain, active means it activates your brain. The method of a drug that a drug gets into the brain are called pharmacokinetics. Literally drug movement into the brain. How does it work? One of the things we have to look at is how is it absorbed into the system? If you've got a headache and you decide to take an aspirin, which you probably wouldn't, you probably take ibuprofen or Tylenol. When you swallow it, it has to be absorbed through your stomach lining. Or maybe it has to be absorbed by your small intestine. You better hope it doesn't need to, because, well, that's how slow-release medications work. They have a protectant around them that will only release in the small intestine. So, yes, it's working in the stomach. Your stomach starts to dissolve things in about 20 minutes. So within 20 to 30 minutes, if you take a Tylenol, the Tylenol will start getting into your system in 20 to 30 minutes. It'll start being absorbed into your system. So your headaches really shouldn't go away for 20 or 30 minutes. But usually your headache goes away right away, because you just took the pill. And the placebo effect will make the pain go away, which is kind of exciting. So it all depends on how it's being taken into your system. You've got an IV going and they shoot juice up into the IV, then probably, potentially, it will get into your system relatively quickly because it's already running into your blood supply. The other question you have to ask is how is it distributed throughout the body? How does it get there? Well, if you swallow it, if you swallow something, it has to be digested. It has to be absorbed into the capillaries, and then it gets into your blood. And now it's distributed throughout your body wherever it needs to go. How is it broken down? How is it metabolized? Usually, if you're taking in a toxin, you're taking in an alkaloid. If you're drinking alcohol or you're smoking pot, you've got all that THC in your system. How is it being taken out of your system? Well, as far as marijuana is concerned, it stays in your system for an extended length of time. Marijuana stays in your system for about 3 weeks. So if you smoke today, you're going to be a little bit high tomorrow. You're going to be just a tiny bit high the next day. Now the THC level in your system isn't high enough to make you high, but it's still in there, and we can still measure it in your urine, as strange as that may seem. So you're going to have a positive urine for 3 weeks. You're not high anymore. Is it affecting you? Well, it affected you the first day. Your short-term memory was crap. The second day, your short-term memory still hadn't recovered completely. The third day, your short-term memory still isn't all that good. But by the fourth day, your short-term memory has improved. It's back to normal, relatively back to normal.
It also depends on how much you smoke.
Exactly. So how much you smoke.
And your body mass.
How much fat you have, how much muscle mass you have, how tall you are, the barometric pressure. Is it a stormy day? Is it a sunny day? All of this has to do with how rapidly you metabolize this substance, how drunk you get, how high you get, everything. I mean, just about everything that deals with you. If you're female, are you on your period? If you're male, have you been angry lately? Do you get really pissed off? All your emotions can accelerate and decelerate the metabolism of all this stuff. So you've got somebody that normally when he smokes pot, he's fine, and then one day he smokes pot because somebody pissed him off. Now all of a sudden he becomes violent after he smoked the pot. And he normally doesn't happen that way. What has happened? Well, the emotions have changed the way he reacts to things. The last question is, how is it eliminated? How does it get out of your system? Most of this stuff is urinated out. It's processed through your liver. It gets into your blood, processed through your liver. Your liver changes it, and it sends it into the bloodstream, and it's eliminated through your kidneys. And this is one of the reasons why you have positive THC. That's the way you get rid of THC. THC, interestingly enough, most substances just run through your body. You take vitamin C, and it just runs through your body. It doesn't get into anything. So you have to continue to take vitamin C in order to have enough vitamin C in your system. Vitamin C is processed out through your kidneys, and then you urinate it out. Marijuana, on the other hand, gets into your fat cells, and it stays there. And that's one of the reasons why it takes 21 days to get rid of it, get it out of your system. It's slowly being sucked out of your fat cells, and it's being processed through your kidneys, and you're urinating it out. And this is one of the reasons why you're going to be positive, have a positive THC test for 21 days. So you need to be careful. Pharmacokinetics, the route of administration is important. This lady, of course, she's cooking heroin and she's sucking it into her lungs. If she injected it, it would get into her system fairly rapidly, but this is actually more rapid, sucking it up like this. The problem is, you're cooking your heroin like this, and you're sucking on it, and you're sucking it in through a straw, but you're also losing a lot. And for that reason, this is kind of a stupid way to do things. The speed of transit into the brain, how fast does it run through your system and get into your brain? If you digest it, if you take it as a pill, it takes 20 or 30 minutes to get into your system. If you inject it, of course, and inject it directly into your bloodstream, then it only takes a matter of seconds to get into your system. If you inhale it, it's even less time. So the speed of transit into your system is part of pharmacokinetics as well. What does it affect once it gets there? What neurotransmitters does it affect? What nerve cells does it affect? As we know, marijuana affects the short-term memory. It affects acetylcholine. So it affects your memory. And this is really kind of a serious problem if you want to remember anything. So don't smoke and cram at the same time. That is counterintuitive. When a psychoactive drug can get to its target in the central nervous system rapidly, the more addictive it tends to be. One of the things we know about tobacco is when you suck that tobacco smoke into your lungs, it gets into your capillaries fairly quickly, and then it affects your dopamine level. It raises, you get a dopamine spike in your brain, and that dopamine spike feels really damn good. So every time you suck that tobacco into your mouth and take it down into your lungs, you're getting a dopamine spike. And that's one of the reasons why tobacco is so addictive. I have a friend that is, I'm 68, he's 66. He brags about being younger than me. He's going to live longer than me. Well, he knows it's not. The guy's already dying of emphysema, but he's been smoking all his life. And I told him, well, you need to stop smoking. Okay. And he didn't. And I told him, well, if you're going to smoke, then stop drinking, because those are two toxins, and it's going to accelerate the damage that is done in your system. Okay. So now he's dying of emphysema. I told him I was going to dance on his grave. I don't dance very well. What the dumb shit? I mean, I've been telling him for years. And he poo-pooed me. He laughed at me. He told me I didn't know what I was talking about. He kept saying, I'll live longer than you, and now he's dying of emphysema. When a person smokes a psychoactive substance or draws it in as a vapor, as with nitrous oxide or inhaling an active chemical solvent, colloquially referred to as huffing, the drug enters the individual's lungs. The drug is rapidly absorbed through the capillary lining of the alveoli of the bronchi. The psychoactive substance travels through the body with the blood and is pumped to the brain and the tissues of the body, and may reach the brain in as short as 7 to 10 seconds, which isn't very long at all. So if you've ever watched on television somebody snorting cocaine, they snort and then their eyes get really big. Well, that's the way it really works. It takes 7 to 10 seconds for it to get into your system. Inhaling is the most rapid method of getting a psychoactive substance into the system. Individuals are able to control levels and reactions of psychoactive substance known as titration by regulating the frequency of use and the depth of inhalation. So if you are smoking a cigarette and you suck it into your mouth, but you don't take it down into your lungs, you're not getting the same effect. I don't know if you've ever watched somebody smoke, but it's really kind of interesting. You'll watch somebody, they got a cigarette, and they light it up, and they puff it down, and they take it down into their lungs, and they'll stand there with that cigarette in their hand. And maybe before the thing goes down to the end, they'll take 3 or 4 puffs. That is titration. They're not really taking very much tobacco into their system. They're not getting very much nicotine into their system. They're only taking 3 or 4 puffs. And that's known as titration. And a lot of times, in the old days, the only people that got breaks were people that smoked, and they would take smoking breaks. And so every 2 or 3 hours, they would get 15 minutes off, and they'd go outside or go wherever they could smoke, and they would smoke. So a lot of people took up smoking just so that they would get that 15-minute break. Because if you don't smoke, you don't get the break. So you'd see people a lot of people standing around with lit cigarettes, just standing there not smoking. And of course, that has to do with titration. They were just trying to get the time off. And I don't blame them. A lot of
Sounds
people
like
think...
NTU.
I'm sorry?
Sounds like NTU. There's one spot for where everybody smokes in
Oh, is that right?
Chico on campus. It's right by the gateway as you're going in.
Uh-huh.
There's some guy, I guess he wanted it to make it a little homey, so he dragged a bench up there.
That
He
sounds
put-
nice.
He put the container, the butts container up
Oh,
there.
really?
So every other day you'll go up there and sweep it up, and I'm like, what are you doing? It's dirt.
Let's sweep the dirt.
But as you're coming in, or if somebody's leaving, you'll see a whole group of people smoking.
Ah, perfect. In the old days, you could only get time off if you needed a smoke break. Because if you're addicted to nicotine, you're addicted to nicotine and you need it. So you need a nicotine break for your smoking. Of course, most people don't smoke this many cigarettes at once. It's really kind of an oddity. Okay. It's not normal for people to smoke that many cigarettes at once. They're too expensive. One time when I first started in the military, you could buy a carton of cigarettes for like $2. And this is back in the Vietnam. They used to give
abnormal.
Yes, that's abnormal. Exactly. So they raised the price of tobacco in the United States, and the reason they did that is to price people out of smoking cigarettes.
One of my cousin's sister's fiance thinks that he can't function without cigarettes. So he has to have a cigarette in the morning, right when he wakes up. Especially like if they argue, he has to have a cigarette.
If they argue, changes the emotions, right? And he's right. It changes the titration of his tobacco.
One time, I was just picking on him. I had his cigarettes, and he went like berserk. He went nuts. And I was like, oh, I should just give him one or something to calm down. But he went crazy, and then I just told my sister, I was like, the cigarettes are over there. And she gave him one. It did change his mood.
Of course it did.
So it
He had
was
that
funny.
dopamine spike. It made him happy again. As strange as that may seem. So if your dopamine level goes down, now all of a sudden you're depressed.
So it was very dependent on cigarettes.
Sure. It's a coping technique as far as he's concerned. Since smoking is an inefficient means of administering the psychoactive properties of marijuana, 60% of the substance is lost, of course, because you're smoking it, and you've got all that tobacco, all that marijuana smoke is going up that way instead of in your lungs. The pharmaceutical companies are working on aerosol and nasal sprays to deliver the THC. And these two of these drugs are Marinol and Dronabinol. This method would also eliminate the tars and other toxic substances that make marijuana carcinogenic. But of course, people, for some reason, they want to smoke pot. They even want to smoke medicinal pot, even though they can get Marinol and Dronabinol, and they can get they can get a delivery of the same substances into the system more efficiently and potentially cheaper. But no, they want to smoke their marijuana. Injecting is where the individual introduces a psychoactive substance into the body by using a hypodermic needle and a syringe. There are 3 methods of injecting appropriate psychoactive substances into the body. Are you ready for this? These are kind of ugly, so don't get shocked. I'll go ahead and get shocked. Intravenous, into the vein. That's what intravenous means. Colloquially, it's known as slamming because it gets into your system very rapidly. This is where the psychoactive substance is injected directly into the bloodstream. This method delivers the psychoactive substance through the bloodstream into the brain in about 15 to 30 seconds. Remember, before we had, what was it, 7 to 10? Yeah, 7 to 10 seconds. This method is the most likely to create a head rush, an intense feeling of excitation and mental electricity. People that shoot up heroin, a lot of times they will put a tourniquet on their arm so they can see their vein. They'll inject the heroin, and then they will wait for a number of seconds before they release the tourniquet, and then it shoots up into the brain. That's the idea. And then they get what they call a head rush. And of course, because they have stopped the titration of the heroin, they've stopped the movement of the heroin, and it'll get up there in more of a solid structure rather than slowly getting into your brain. And they call that a head rush. And some people they inject just for the head rush. They're looking for the head rush. Intramuscular, into the muscle, colloquially referred to as muscling. The psychoactive substance is injected directly into the muscle. This method of introducing psychoactive substances through the bloodstream and into the brain takes about 3 to 5 minutes to get from the muscle into the brain, to get into the blood supply actually. This method will not create a head rush, but a slower buildup of euphoria. So if you've ever been injected with anything, it probably took a couple minutes for that to start working. I think I told you guys that I went to the emergency room over the holidays. I thought I had appendicitis. Anyway, they gave me a shot of Toradol, and she gave me the shot, and she came back about 10 minutes later and asked me if it was helping the pain. And of course, it didn't help the pain, but that's okay. That's okay. But she knew that it was going to take 3 to 5 minutes for it to get into my system.
Do you think it didn't help because psychologically,
Yeah.
like you're telling yourself?
Oh, sure. Yeah, the placebo effect, of course. And a lot of painkillers don't work on me, and I knew that, and so I didn't have the placebo effect. I also didn't have any effect from the Toradol. She was kind of upset. The doctor was upset. They want to make the pain go away. They want to fix you with whatever they have to fix you, and it didn't work. And they were upset because they thought I was after something else.
Yeah.
But I told them that opiates didn't work, so I wasn't going to let them shoot me up with morphine or Demerol. It doesn't work. The last type is known as subcutaneous, under the skin. It's colloquially known as skin popping. And if you've ever seen anybody with these kinds of scars on their arms, and I have, of course I've worked in emergency rooms, they probably were skin poppers. There we go. Yeah, let's check everybody out. Check Johnny out. I can't see his arms. Just kidding, of course. I've already checked your arms out, Johnny. I don't know. There's no scars like that. I know, it's sad. I do it automatically, and I don't even mean to. But I'll look at people's the antecubital level right here. I just do it, and I don't even think about it. I'm just looking at your veins to see if they're okay. I'm not. Yeah. Let me see if they're all scarred up. Yeah, there you go. They're not very good.
So if you want me to kill someone,
I was just kidding. I'm not checking for tracks. I'm not really doing it, but it's automatic. I just do it because I used to be a lab tech and I had to draw blood from people, and so I just automatically look at your veins to see if they're any good. And of course, if there are tracks, I'm going, oh my God, what have I found out? I had a friend up on Fort Belknap.
You jump to conclusions.
Sorry.
You jump to conclusions.
I do, unfortunately. I had a friend up on Fort Belknap that had these kinds of scars on his arms. And I knew exactly what was going on. He told me he burned it with a cigar. And I know the difference between a scar, a burn scar and one of those scars. He was a skin popper, I knew he was. But he lied to me. He lied to me a lot, so that wasn't the only lie. Unfortunately, it was a skin popper. This method of introducing psychoactive substances through the bloodstream and into the brain takes about 3 to 5 minutes, just like intramuscular. This method will not create a head rush, but a slower buildup of euphoria. It's also a very relatively inefficient way to do it. One of the problems, intramuscular, of course, it's going deep into your muscle tissue, so the probability of it running out or coming out is fairly remote. Skin popping happens all the time, and that's one of the reasons why he has so many different scars on his arm. Because he started using an area, it started scarring over. Once that happens, the substance that he's injecting will just come running out. You can make your muscles so porous that happens as well. So if that happens, you have to twist the needle. Oh man, these people are so serious about this. They're looking for their it's time. I know it's not. They're looking for their rush so badly that they have to Z-track. I'm not going to show you that. It's really ugly. You have to twist the needle 90 degrees in order to, and then do it one more time in order to make it stay in the system. I know, it's sad. Okay, we need to stop right now. Let me turn this on. We need to stop right now. Thank you guys for being so patient with me.